Our last speaker is another amazing community organizer who's been doing this for many, many, many years. He's got a long bio, so I just kept the notes with me for this one. Right now, he's a founder of Yerdle. We got some Yerdle fans in the audience. Yerdle's a marketplace that's completely community-oriented. It's all about exchanging goods and supporting each other, and there's no actual monetary exchange. There's over 500,000 members of that community, and he's gotten to that point after years and years of grassroots community organizing, of being a well-known environmentalist. He founded the Sierra Student Coalition and helped to pass the legislation that resulted in Death Valley and Joshua Tree National Park being established. He then went on to become the elected national president of the Sierra Club when he was 23 years old. After that, he left to form Act Now Productions, where he built cause-oriented communities for clients ranging from the Beastie Boys to the World Wildlife Fund. And in a controversial move, he also helped Walmart build their sustainability strategy and went on to help dozens of companies form their own sustainability efforts. He's the author of Strategy for Sustainability by Harvard Business Press. He's our closing keynote for CMX. Let's give one more huge CMX welcome to Adam Werbach.
All right. Hello. Thank you. Hello. All right. Hey, Shira. Community organizing, community management, community leadership quite literally holds the future of the planet in its hands. So what I'll talk about for the next few minutes is the tactics, the tools, the things that we can bring to bear to make our work go even further, to make sure that we bring the capabilities to the people who we organize, the people who are in our communities, to be able to go do extraordinary things far beyond what we could have ever imagined. My favorite story about organizing was told to me by Jim Hightower, and it was about Senator Bill Bradley, who kind of gave a talk like this. And after that, he went to a dinner in his honor. And he sat down, it was a formal dinner, and the waiter came by and gave him a roll and a pat of butter and began to walk away. And the former senator said, "Excuse me, can I have a second pat of butter, please?" Reasonable request. The waiter said, "I'm sorry, sir, but our policy is only one pat of butter per person," and began to walk along. Well, before the former senator could say anything, the host of the dinner, who was sitting over here, jumped up, aghast, and went over to the waiter and said, "Waiter! Don't you know who this man is? This is former Senator Bill Bradley, NBA star, Rhodes Scholar, maybe one day the President of the United States of America. Give the man a pat of butter." And the waiter was totally unfazed. He straightened the napkin on his arm, the ridiculous cummerbund he had to wear, and said, "Well, maybe you don't know who I am." "I'm your waiter, and I'm the guy in charge of the butter, and I say he only gets one." He walked away. Now, at that dinner, the former senator didn't get a pat of butter, which is no great tragedy. But what we saw was a person taking what little power he had and exercising that power and saying, maybe I'm not in charge of much, but I can maintain the amount of butter this one person will have. And the question I'll sort of pose is, how do we get people in the place where they can exercise that power? How do we get them in the place where they feel like whatever it is, they can do it? And of course, they tie it to a larger sense of justice, a larger sense of what they hope to achieve in their lives, for their communities, for their families, for themselves. And that's hopefully what we can begin to reveal as we sort of think through some of the challenges that we face. This is a map from NASA of the Arctic. And you'll see, these are this past year, the Arctic, which normally has been impassable for 5 months of the year, is now impassable only 2 months. They're organizing yacht races to go through the spaces there. The oil companies, the very oil companies that helped to create a situation where the Arctic would melt down to this extent, and this is the lowest extent we've seen, This picture is what it normally goes to. Those same oil companies are now trying to drill there. That's like going to a cancer ward and trying to sell cigarettes. It's the very real situation that's happening. This is a map of coral bleaching in the United States, or actually across the world. We're having a massive coral die-off, a bleaching event right now. Now, this has happened before. In years past, in 1998, we saw 18% of all coral reefs on the planet bleach. This year, we're heading to 38% of all coral reefs bleaching. This is because of climate change. It's not in dispute. It is happening right now. This is fire coral. Is anyone here a diver or been diving? Fire coral is something you do not want to touch. The red is the healthy one. The white is the bleached fire coral. This is happening. It's happening right now. This is the axolotl. Incredible. That's a real thing. They call it the Mexican walking fish, and it only exists now in about 2 or 3 lakes in Mexico. Because it's so beautiful, people have collected it as a species for aquaria, and climate change and development has hurt its habitat. So there's only a few hundred of these left in the wild. These are incredible creatures. They have these neotenous aspects. So, for example, sort of like lizards, if they get like an arm or stuck in a rock and it pulls off, the arm will regenerate, which is an amazing magic trick. There's also new evidence that if their heart is injured, it will actually regenerate. It's the first species we've ever discovered that does that, and scientists are studying it to see if we can learn something about fixing the human heart as well. This is what's at stake. So when I say protecting communities, building communities is like the thing we can do to maintain or protect the planet, I'm dead serious about it. Now, what you can go do is go get arrested. I did this at the White House last year because at some point you actually have to stand up, in my mind, and say this is enough, that all the grassroots organizing tactics may not be working, we have to put our bodies on the line. And I wish that were not the case. I encourage you to think about it. But if you're not wanting to do that, there's a lot we can do. This is a very famous photo of the Highlander Institute in Tennessee, where some of the greatest civil rights organizers came to be. That's Martin Luther King, Miles Horton, Rosa Parks, Ralph Abernathy, all in this picture. And they all studied together in this institute that Miles Horton set up to understand what community organizing could be and how it could actually happen. Rosa Parks didn't just get tired and sit in a bus. This was a part of a long-standing, trained organization. I wanted to read you something that Miles Horton wrote because it sort of felt right for the moment. He was talking about movements and how we had to learn how to form them. And when I say community, I really am saying a movement. He wrote, "It's only in a movement that an idea is often made simple enough and direct enough that it can be spread rapidly. Then your leadership multiplies very rapidly because there is something explosive going on. People see that other people, not so different than themselves, do things that they never thought could be done. They're emboldened and challenged to step into the water, and once they get in the water, it's as if they've never not been there before." Isn't that beautiful? The sense that this is your habitat. I can actually exercise this power. I can be in that space. Well, the rules of organizing that have come from that are not so crazy, and I'll boil them down to 3 right here. The first, meet people where they are. Meet people where they're at. Find a way to actually connect to them. And sometimes, this can be quite simple. The biggest failure of organizers is not telling people to come to something, not to show up, not to tell them, not to invite them or set the meeting at a time when someone could come. Just make it convenient. Then really understanding what is their self-interest. Because people are rational. People won't come to do whatever you want them to go do unless they can actually see it in their self-interest. Can you explain how this fits into their self-interest? And that's super interesting for community organizers who frequently, they're talking about this global sense. I started talking about climate change and reefs. Why is that in my self-interest? My job as an organizer is to be able to explain how being on Yurtle connects to that, how being in this community connects to something broader and something that's happening in their very own life. The second, and this is probably, I think, the greatest potential failure of community managers is build capability. There's a relationship that's being built here where they're coming in and helping you achieve something, and you in return have to give them capabilities that they can go use outside of whatever entity or conversation that we're a part of. This is absolutely central. Did they go out at the end and able to do something? So in my neighborhood in the Mission, we organized a campaign to build stop signs on corners because people were driving too fast around the neighborhood and people didn't feel safe walking. And that was really important to me, for my family. But afterwards, it was important to me that everyone else knew how to build a petition, how to knock on doors, how to take their grievance to City Hall. That was the exchange. They helped me, and we together put the stop signs, but they at the end had powers and capabilities that they could take and express in other places. That's really the yardstick to hold. And finally, the organization itself is a victory. We should be seeking to find sub-organizations that we're not in control of as part of our community management. How do we actually have the organization, that the outcome be the organization itself? Heather Booth from the Midwest Academy says it's OOO. Organizers organize organizations. It's absolutely essential that at the end of it, there is something that sort of sticks these people together. And it may not be you, because you might go away. Anyone here is in a tech startup or those things, these things sometimes go. You look at what companies exist, companies will not be around forever. People and the organizations they have, they can last forever. Okay, so what I want to do is take these three rules, these three thoughts, which are compiled from many lists of organizing rules, and share you how these sort of fit across some examples of organizing. This is James Watt. James Watt I'm very thankful to because he made me an organizer. James Watt was the Secretary of the Interior under Ronald Reagan, and he had the wonderful idea of trying to privatize our national parks. He also had all sorts of wonderful things to say. He once said, "I've got diversity on my team. I've got a woman, 2 blacks, a cripple, and 2 Jews." Wasn't the most popular thing to say. He also said, "Environmentalists, if we can't deal with them at the ballot box, we can deal with them with a cartridge box." Okay, this is a member of government, a secretary. I first heard about James Watt in 2nd grade because the Sierra Club had sent a petition to my parents to oust James Watt. They were members of the Sierra Club. I somehow saw it and it said, "Sign your name." And in 2nd grade that day, we had an assignment to learn how to sign our names. So this really connected. I was being met where I was at, right? So I brought it in, and my teacher, who must have thought this was a good idea, encouraged us all to get our big, you remember the 2nd grade pencils, and to write our names on this petition. And it was so exciting, and I had so much fun that she let me go to the other classrooms and collect their names. And pretty soon we had 200 signatures from my grade school. Building an organization right there. Even though that piece of direct mail never said, go to your school and make this happen. Those 200 signatures went with over 1 million signatures across the country, and eventually James Watt, and really of his own doing as well, was removed from the role. This is the California desert tortoise, another endangered species. About 90% of the species has been wiped out. It's an extraordinary creature. I've always loved it. I grew up in Southern California, so I've always loved the desert. They live from 60 to 80 years. They can burrow down the Mojave Desert, the Joshua Tree. They can burrow down into the ground where the temperatures reach 140 degrees and still survive. Extraordinary, and just really fun, animals, creatures. When we were starting to work for the California Desert Protection Act, most senators outside of California called it the kitty litter campaign because they thought that all the deserts kind of looked like kitty litter. And of course, those of us who were desert activists thought, wow, no, this is not kitty litter. This is extraordinary landscape. This can't be destroyed, and we have to protect it. And unfortunately, people in the Southeast in particular, we had a group of senators who just wouldn't let that happen. So in organizing, we found a woman named Stephanie Jowers and said, hey, how are we going to turn this senator around? Well, she figured out what school all the senators' kids were at and organized what we call dorm storms in those. So this is a campaign where you basically get 20 kids together, you get music and beer, and you go into a dorm and just make so much noise and racket that you just kind of get everyone together, signing petitions, talking things. And they dorm stormed basically the dorms of all the kids of all the senators who opposed us. This wasn't actually even, I didn't even know the tactic was happening. We knew about a dorm storm, but we didn't know it was being done. Each one of those senators changed their vote because of Stephanie Jowers figuring out, I don't know if I don't know who the senator is, but I actually can figure out what school their daughter goes to, and I can get some friends together and I can do something. She figured out how to bring this into her world, and she built an organization in the process in those schools that actually became the Sierra Student Coalition. This is Jan Bennet. Jan Bennet is a great teacher of mine. She was at the time an associate at Walmart. And we were handed the task by the CEO of Walmart to figure out how do you make sustainability matter to 2 million people who work there. This is an audience that didn't actually, when polled, didn't believe that global warming was real, had kind of very, I would say, retrograde views of what environmental protection should actually be. And figuring out we're organizers, we got together some workshops and sat and listened and sort of figured out a behavioral framework where people could take individual actions to do something about that. I figured recycle or save energy. And Jan said, well, I like this, but my individual action is going to be to get my type 2 diabetes under control. And I said, okay, well, that's good, but maybe you could think about something, more global. Maybe you could save energy, solar panels, something like that. And she said, excuse me, how is my type 2 diabetes not an environmental issue? How is this not absolutely essential to my functioning, my being in this community, my being able to take care of my family? How is this not? And of course she was right. And we encouraged her to continue. And she recruited thousands of people, literally, to take on their own personal sustainability practices. Over 2 years, we had over 1 million people commit to personal sustainability practices, and 2 years later, about half of them were continuing on them. And these ranged from things like recycling and saving energy to things that were, in my mind, in the end, more important: quitting smoking, getting your type 2 diabetes under control. Jan, through her organizing, basically came up with this very simple behavioral framework: RISE. Pick a personal sustainability practice that's repeatable, that's inspirational, that's sustainable, that's something you want to keep on doing, and that's enjoyable. It's something that's fun. And this is something that's good for you, good for the community, and good for the planet. Well, Jan lost 75 pounds. She was able to go off her type 2 diabetes medication. And for her, the most important thing, the corollary that really worked for her the most, was that her daughter started connecting with her again. And her daughter had decided not to have children because she didn't want to have them in this world. And by watching what her mom did, it gave her enough faith to sort of keep going. So you talk to Jan about why this was important, she will say, it made me be able to speak to my daughter again. And again, as an organizer, I didn't meet her where she was at. I was trying to bring her over to me. Come, save the earth. And she was like, I got to save myself. Now, by educating me and getting me to understand this is something broader than my particularly narrow vision, she was able to organize thousands of people. It's Jan in one of her stores. And before I sort of run you down a track to say this is only for social good, because it does have a lot of that, this is something called compacted Tide, and Tide figured out that you could actually pull the water out of detergent, and it would be a lot cheaper to ship around, it would take a lot less energy, and it would actually help their margins. And they found out about Jan because in the stores where Jan was organizing, that stuff flew off the shelves. And there wasn't an ad campaign. It was just that they had figured out themselves, like, oh, what do we do? How do we actually bring this to life? And they were like, this is a cool product, we should go sell it. So there are these sort of unintended benefits and consequences of giving people that type of capability and power. So as a lifetime organizer, and sometimes I couldn't have been more thrilled to have the chance to work with people at Walmart and really understand and learn from them. But the frustration for me was that the pace of change still wasn't large and fast enough. That even though Walmart, the world's largest company, is now the world's largest seller of organics and the world's largest seller of energy-efficient light bulbs and that piece, it really doesn't add up to anything when you actually talk about the scale of change that climate change presents to us. And one thing we noticed was that even though we were selling better things, or Walmart was selling better things, they're still selling a lot more of them. And one of the challenges is, how do we actually sell fewer new things? Kind of a simple question. And I kind of went around the world trying to figure out how to do that. And I ended up in Mumbai, in Dharavi. About 60% of the people in Mumbai live in slums, like Dharavi. Dharavi is where Slumdog Millionaire was filmed. It's right in the center of the city. 1 million people live there. And in some ways, it has extraordinary challenges. Sewage, health, it really is, in some ways, a terrible place. But in others, there's an extraordinary community that exists there because they don't have anyone else. There is no access to formal credit. There aren't street sweeping organizations. They have to set all that stuff themselves. The government doesn't provide. They have to figure it out themselves. And this is a woman named Sabana, who I met, who was part of a savings circle. And women's savings circles don't exist just in Dharavi, but they're extraordinary there. It's a very simple organizing idea where people save money every day, like Sabana, and they take that money and they give it to someone else in their community. So there's about 20 women organized in a block, and one person every day comes and collects their money. They don't have access to a bank, so they do this, right? And they decide to use that money first for things that the community needs, a public toilet, or fixing the sidewalk, or someone's got injured and needs medical care. So they use that for that first. And then they try to grow it. And that's the really extraordinary thing about it. So they have these 3 simple rules. Save every day, so you have to do something every day. And I'm a huge behavioralist and believer that daily behaviors are absolutely critical in this. Second, survey your community. Know who your community is. They believe Facebook shouldn't know things about us. We should know things about us. They know what everyone makes on their block. They know what everyone voted for on their block. They know amazing information that kind of astounded me. But they believe that the information actually belongs to the community, and the community should know information about itself, because that's how you can support each other. And finally, they all commit to spread the word. And that final one, that viral commitment, is truly extraordinary. There are now 60 million women across the world who are part of saving circles based on this model, and they're basically all spread by this woman, Sheila Patel, who's the head of Slum Dwellers International. And after learning about this, sort of being blown away by the enterprise of it, the success of it, and how fast it was growing, she showed me this thing that they were doing, which is that sort of on the side, they share things. So she's holding a pair of jeans that someone had that was extra that goes into sort of the community share pile. And then you also see a bunch of wedding dishes because, these people, their family incomes are $2 to $4 a day. So there's not a lot of wealth here. But they could share one set of wedding dishes, for example, instead of having everyone have their own, which is sort of more like the United States. So we came back with that kernel and said, well, is there a way that we could have the accumulation of things and the getting rid of things be part of an organizing framework? And that actually is the beginning germ of what Yurtle was. As you might know, hoarding has become an extraordinary challenge among Americans. Clinical psychologists say about 6% of Americans suffer clinically from a diagnosis of hoarding. And this is the first time the American Psychological Association does it's called the DSM, they're basically their manual of diagnoses. And this one, when it was released, had hoarding as one of it because it's such a growing phenomena in America. And there are sort of these concomitant things that happen too. Self-storage in the United States has gone up by 1,000%. And you just see that people are now struggling more and more with the things they have. We spent a long time trying to accumulate just enough, and now that we're sort of gagging on all the things that we have. And for me, this is very fertile organizing territory, common problems that everyone feels, situations that are not so crazy. Every one of us has, I'd venture to say, a junk drawer. Is anyone here who doesn't have a junk drawer? Okay. Because please tell me how you did it. We also know that this doesn't just affect us emotionally. Half of all Americans are one $400 bill away from not being able to pay their bills. So crashed a car, a medical emergency. We have roughly $1 trillion worth of stuff sitting in our closets and garages, and yet we're $400 away from financial ruin. It's a delicate race that people are on. with that idea, we started Yurtle with this idea that we could actually help people move those things back and forth. And this is, to give you a sense that this is a very national phenomenon. People are across the country. This is the last 10,000 things that have moved on Yurtle. And it's part of this idea that is, kind of changing in people's minds. Strangers crashed my car, ate my food, and wore my pants. They wore Yurtle pants. But if you think about it, 5 years ago, if I had said someone is going to stay in your house and someone in a Camry is going to swing by and pick you up today, that would be very scary to most Americans. And yet that behavior change just began and happened. And this is super exciting because when we can find these sort of telltale behaviors that are beginning to move people, we have an opportunity to begin to move ourselves. There was a bunch of research basically headed up by Martin Seligman, again, the American Psychological Association, about 15 years ago now. When he became the head of it, he sort of said, we've spent the last 75 years doing clinical research into what makes people unhappy, what makes people unsuccessful in life and depressed, and that is our understanding of mental illness. We understand how people are able to fail, but we don't understand how people are able to succeed. And from that, he really birthed the concept of positive psychology, which is kind of a core building block of organizing philosophy now. The question being, how do we actually get people into a mode where they think they are capable of changing the realities of their life? And what he established then was that a ton of field research began, all coming up with basically 3 conclusions. And all the positive psych research in the last now 15 years has demonstrated basically there are 3 things that make humans happy. The first is having a sense of gratitude, being able to say you're thankful for something and to be able to express it. And of course, this is a really wonderful story tool to be able to ask people things that they're happy about. But if you can express that you're grateful and have that opportunity, you have a good chance of being happy. The second is that you experience flow. And flow research basically is that moment when a runner is just about to cross the finish line, or when a writer is writing their novella. It's that moment when you're doing the thing you were meant to do. And if you don't know what that thing is, you have to go find it quick. Because everyone should have something that they're super excited about. What is that moment? And it could be mundane, it could be extraordinary. It doesn't matter, but it's that thing that just enlivens you. At Walmart, we heard a lot of people talk about when a store was really busy and it was super fun, it was powering and exciting. That actually felt like flow, because that's when they felt totally utilized. But have we established and created a moment of flow for people and that they can actually understand and experience? And the third factor is a sense of service. That are you serving something perhaps larger than yourself? That's super exciting and ambitious. But people who actually can define that are clinically proven to be happier. So gratitude, flow, and service, those 3 things are organizing building blocks to build into our community organizing, our community management. These are stories, these are some examples of packages that people are sending back and forth on Yurtle. So the way Yurtle works is if you have something that you're not using, you post it and you assign a set of Yurtle dollars. It's a fictional currency that we've created to allow people to pass things back and forth. And then someone gets it from you because they've earned those Yurtle dollars by posting something themselves. And what's extraordinary is it doesn't look like an Amazon package. It looks like this. It looks like people decorating and having that sense. It's just they're similarly marking things to show that this is who they are. It's an expression of themselves, not just a package that's being delivered. Here's a letter someone wrote. My husband waited until I was packing everything up to tell me he was sad to see the lion go. It was one of the first toys our first son had. These boys have so many wonderful things, though, so I really hope everything is well loved in its new home. Thank you, Sarah. That sense that I have something that is important to me, and I'm going to pass it on to you. It's a beautiful, beautiful aspect. So we're meeting people where they're at. right? Because people have stuff. Everyone's got a junk drawer, so you have to meet them there somehow. And we're trying to build capacity and capability for people so that they can actually go do things themselves, and we're trying to build organizations within that. This is Natasha Thompson. Natasha had the idea of going for a year without buying anything new. She called it Y for Y, Yurtle for a year. Oh, this is great. This wasn't an idea we made up, she did. So she's now in month 10, started in January, and she hasn't bought anything new. She's decided that she could drink wine and food and have disposable items. But pretty much, she's not buying anything new. It's had a radical effect on her credit card, and it's had a wonderful effect on her life. She loves it. She actually talks about how it just helps her be a little more present at all times. She was so inspiring to people that over 2,500 people have followed her to Yurtle for a month and have decided to not buy anything new for 1 month. And that simple behavioral tool has allowed people to sort of commit and flip that switch, right? To say, oh, I can actually do something. I build it. So here's an organizer building an organization. She is serving in an organizer role on behalf of Yurtle, and she's built this organization of people who are making this commitment for themselves. And we've seen that throughout the kind of Yurtle universe. So for example, our fraud patrol happens by the Yurtle Guardians, people who set up a Facebook group and said, we're going to see and check to see if there's any fraud happening, because if there is, we're going to go do something about it. Now, there's a challenge of making it not a vigilante group, of course, but it's allowing them to actually solve that. It's taking the ideas of organizing and bringing them to community management. And sometimes it's something kind of wonderful and unexpected. This is Charles Hastings, who had the idea that, wow, there's all this stuff, and I have all these problems in my community. How do I connect it? So in Oakland, where he was, the school had recently destroyed its music program. So he figured out a way to get 37 guitars and other instruments on Yurtle to turn that music program back on. The thing that we're really looking for here is, how does a person feel like that thing, that organization that someone else started, that concept, that set of rules, is something that they can manipulate and own, that they can believe it's theirs, that they have as much ownership in it as you, and then go do something about it. And then let them invent and sort of follow them as quickly as you can. And I'm just trying to give you sort of a quick sum of what people look like. These are kids. At the bottom is Liz, who just got married. Some happy kids picking up things. Some people will tell you that the way that we have to get across this sort of threshold of ecological disaster that we keep on seeing is by making people really depressed. And I hope I didn't do too much of that at the beginning. And while I think sharing the facts is critically important, and we need to know them and say them in a non-disputed sort of fashion, we'll get a lot further by banking on the generosity, humanity, love, and heart of the people on this planet. There are incredible challenges we're facing, but more and more, we're actually being able to change them. In California, that desert tortoise is actually coming back. Those lands are protected. Where James Watt tried to destroy Yellowstone National Park, Yellowstone is strong, and there's actually 3 times as many grizzly bears there as there were when James Watt was around. If you go to the Chukchi Sea in the Arctic, you will not see shell, because a bunch of activists on kayaks, helped to raise the issue about Shell sending their own drilling rig there, and the oil market fell apart. Between those two things, we are not drilling in the Arctic right now. The point I make is that actually it is happening, that aspiration for community organizing beginning to change the facts on the ground is actually happening. And while it can be quite hard to build any community, if we have the commitment to build capability in the people that we are organizing, they're going to do extraordinary things. They are going to do things that we can't imagine, and they're going to do things that are far outside our experience and our capabilities ourselves. Which is why I say again, the work that we're doing in organizing communities is the most important work on the planet, and it perhaps is the work that will save the planet itself. Thank you.